The warp is a problem for every race in the galaxy. Humanity risks corruption during travel. The Eldar created a hungry god. The Tau barely understand it. And some things lurking in its depths terrify even the Chaos Gods themselves. Remember the Eisenstein incident? When Navigator Palos' mind shattered mid-journey, stranding thousands in the Immaterium for weeks? In this video, we'll journey deep into the cosmic chaos, exploring not only the 4 major Chaos Gods, but also lesser demons, independent entities, and unique phenomena like the Well of Eternity. We'll examine shadow-manipulating Umbra, emotion-feeding Medusae, and unexpected warp manifestations that pose existential threats. The warp is way more than just Chaos Gods. Ask any 40k fan about the warp and they'll immediately mention the 4 Chaos Gods. But that's like saying the ocean is just sharks. Sure, sharks are scary and get all the attention, but they're just the apex predators in a vast ecosystem teeming with countless other creatures. Most Warhammer players have a seriously limited view of what's actually going on in the warp. They know Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh. They recognize a bloodthirster when they see one. Maybe they've even read about the great game where the Chaos Gods battle for supremacy. But honestly, that barely scratches the surface of what's actually in there. The reality is way more mind-bending. The warp contains dozens, possibly hundreds of other entities that rarely get mentioned in codexes or novels. Think about that for a second. An entire dimension filled with bizarre creatures that most players have never even heard of. These are entirely different classes of entities with their own agendas, behaviors, and horrifying abilities. Beneath the turbulent surface where the Chaos Gods wage their eternal conflicts, the depths of the warp contain currents and undertows of pure psychic energy that can suddenly shift, dragging unwary travelers into realms where even demons fear to tread. Just as the deepest ocean trenches hide creatures adapted to crushing pressure and eternal darkness, the farthest reaches of the warps harbor entities evolved in conditions utterly alien to any material concept. The warp is a realm composed entirely of raw, psychic energy and emotion. Every feeling, thought, and soul in the material universe creates ripples in this sea of consciousness. Happy thoughts, murderous rage, quiet contemplation, it all feeds into this parallel dimension and takes on bizarre forms that our mortal minds struggle to comprehend. Physical laws don't exist there. Time flows differently, sometimes backwards, sometimes in loops, sometimes not at all. Space is completely malleable. You could travel what feels like miles on the warp and end up exactly where you started, or take a single step and cross half the galaxy. Even the Imperium's most knowledgeable scholars, inquisitors of the Ordo Malleus, who've spent centuries studying demonic lore, barely understand what's really in there. The Inquisition has entire vaults filled with accounts of warp entities that defy categorization. Reports describe creatures made of living shadow, parasites that lay eggs on psychers' brains, swarms of emotion-drinking insects, and entities so strange they don't even have physical forms as we understand them. Take the case of Inquisitor Harlan Nale, who documented his encounter with what he called the Formless Tide, an entity that manifested as a wave of impossible geometries that seemed to erase reality itself as it approached. His psyker attendants went mad instantly. The survivors reported experiencing thousands of years of memories that weren't their own. The entity vanished without trace, leaving only a perfect spherical void in the ship's hull that somehow didn't breach atmosphere. The Umbra are shadow beings that look like spheres of absolute darkness, with tentacles made of solid shadow. They can literally manipulate shadows and darkness itself. The Medusae are bizarre, parasitic creatures that feed on extreme emotions and can bond with human hosts. These aren't demons of any chaos god, They're something else entirely. The Imperial records speak of expeditions into the warp where entire crews encountered entities that couldn't even be described in human language. The survivors can only communicate what they saw through abstract paintings or music, because words literally failed them. The enslavers aren't aligned with any Chaos God. They're parasitic entities that can take control of psychers and use them to create portals into real space, allowing them to mind control entire populations. They've supposedly wiped out entire civilizations throughout galactic history. The Psych Nuin are insect-like warp creatures that lay eggs in unprotected psychers' minds. When the eggs hatch, the larvae eat the victim's brain from inside out before bursting forth as fully formed adults. There are even entities from the deep warp, regions so far removed from reality that even the Chaos Gods fear them. Places like the Well of Eternity, said to contain knowledge so fundamental and terrible that even godlike beings can't comprehend it. Some of these entities were created by mortal races. The Eldar created gods. The Orcs manifested their deities through collective belief. Even the Tau have apparently spawned some kind of greater good entity through their human subjects' beliefs. In a dimension where belief and reality are essentially the same, the line between real gods and created ones becomes extremely blurry. The Big Four. Quick Chaos Gods recap. The symbiotic relationship between creator and creation becomes even more disturbing when we look at the four major Chaos Gods. Every time someone in the galaxy feels overwhelming rage, crippling despair, manipulative ambition, or excessive desire, they're literally feeding an immortal entity that exists solely to amplify that emotion until it consumes entire star systems. These gods are manifestations of our own psychological darkness projected across an entire galaxy. What makes the Big Four so fascinating is that they operate with perfect consistency while remaining utterly incomprehensible. They're predictable in their obsessions, yet unfathomable in their true nature. Take Khorne, the blood god. Raw anger, violence, and martial pride personified. Every act of bloodshed empowers him, from bar fights to planetary genocides. His realm is a landscape of brass and blood, where rivers of gore flow from mountains of skulls. His followers gain superhuman strength, but with a brutal catch. Khorne demands blood, regardless of its source. Eventually, his worshippers must turn their weapons on themselves or each other to satisfy his endless hunger. More insidious is Nurgle, the Plague Father, who embodies a disturbing contradiction. He represents decay, disease, and mortality, everything sentient beings fear. Yet, his followers describe him as generous and paternal. When death terrifies you, Nurgle offers an alternative: embrace decay and receive his gifts of immortality through endless rot. His domain is a festering garden where new diseases grow like prize roses. His followers gain immunity to pain as their bodies transform into bloated sacks of contagion, genuinely believing they spread love across the galaxy with each new plague. Rising beyond physical corruption, Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways, seduces the intellect. He represents ambition, hope, and forbidden knowledge, capturing anyone who thinks, just one more secret and I'll have the power I need. His domain is a crystal labyrinth of schemes, where books write themselves and towers constantly reconfigure. Followers gain psychic abilities and arcane knowledge, but they pay with mutations and madness. The cruelest truth: Tzeentch has no end game. Change itself is a goal, making him both the god of hope and the architect of its inevitable disappointment. At the pinnacle of corruption stands Slaanesh, the Dark Prince, youngest of the Pantheon. Born from the collective psychic trauma of an entire civilization's excess, Slaanesh embodies every sensation pushed beyond healthy limits. The perfect meal, painting, or kill, all become gateways to corruption when pursued obsessively. Slaanesh's realm blurs pleasure and pain until they're indistinguishable. Followers gain enhanced senses but are doomed to chase even greater extremes as normal experiences no longer satisfy them, eventually becoming unable to feel anything at all. What's most disturbing is that each god contains a seed of what should be a virtue. Khorne began as courage, Nurgle as resilience, Tzeentch as hope, and Slaanesh as a drive for perfection. But the warp twists these qualities, removing all restraint until they become monstrous caricatures. The horror of chaos lies in its humanity. It's us, with the volume cranked to 11. These gods are like emotional hurricanes. They don't just passively receive feelings, they actively create conditions to generate more. Khorne's demons incite violence, Nurgle's plagues spread hopelessness. Tzeentch distributes forbidden knowledge. Slaanesh tempts with indulgence. It's self-perpetuating. More power means more effective scenarios to feed them further. The distinction between these warp entities and those in the deep warp is crucial. The Big Four need mortal minds to exist. They're partially comprehensible because they reflect our psychology. Deep warp entities exist in layers so profoundly separated from reality that they follow completely alien patterns. They don't need emotions or worship. Their motives, if they even have anything recognizable as motives, are foreign even to the Chaos Gods themselves. Think of the Chaos Gods as dark mirrors of humanity, distorted but recognizably related to us. Deep warp entities are like eldritch abstractions operating on principles so alien that even immortal gods find them unsettling. Where Chaos Gods corrupt souls, these deeper entities might erase the very concept of what a soul is. Demonic hierarchies, the Footsoldiers of chaos. The massive armies that serve the Chaos Gods aren't random monsters thrown together. They're carefully designed weapon systems with specific tactical roles that mirror twisted versions of mortal militaries. Each demon type has evolved or been crafted for maximum effectiveness in spreading its patron's influence across reality. And what's truly terrifying? The common demons we see represented on the tabletop are just the standardized forms that our limited mortal minds can process without completely breaking. Khorne's demonic hierarchy is arguably the most straightforward, which makes sense for a god who values direct action. His primary foot soldiers are called bloodletters, crimson-skinned humanoids with wicked hellblades that slice through both armor and soul. They operate in murder host formations of exactly 8 cohorts, of 8 bloodletters each, reflecting Khorne's sacred number. Picture a battlefield where these formations advance like living battering rams, their hellblades creating a wall of slashing crimson steel that methodically harvests skulls with mechanical precision. Veterans who've claimed thousands of skulls become heralds, while exceptional warriors ascend to Bloodmaster status, commanding legion. Khorne's hierarchy perfectly blends meritocracy with absolute tyranny. Any bloodletter can rise through the ranks by claiming enough skulls, but failure means being consumed by stronger demons. His elite warriors include fleshhounds, relentless trackers who hunt prey across dimensions using brass collars that nullify psychic powers. And the monstrous juggernauts, living battering rams that serve as mounts for favored champions. Nurgle's demonic organization is bizarrely bureaucratic for a god of decay. His plague bearers function as accountants, endlessly counting diseases, symptoms, and deaths in a cosmic ledger that never balances. Each carries a specific contagion that forms both their identity and purpose. They advance by developing more complex diseases, with the most accomplished becoming tallymen, overseeing entire plague companies. The strangest aspect of Nurgle's hierarchy is its incorporation of genuine affection in twisted form. Beasts of Nurgle behave like enthusiastic but hideously toxic pets, smothering victims in poisonous slime they consider play. Meanwhile, tiny Nurglings represent specific minor ailments, often birthed from plague bearers when their diseases reach certain potency. A single great unclean one might contain thousands of lesser entities comprised into one rotting form. Tzeentch's demonic hierarchy is appropriately fluid and confusing. His pink horrors split into two blue horrors when destroyed, which themselves can split into pairs of brimstone horrors when slain. Imperial Guard veterans describe the psychological horror of watching their victory turn into defeat as each killed demon multiplies into more numerous but slightly weaker entities. The battlefield gradually filling with a cacophony of multicolored horrors where once stood only a few dozen. The organizational structure deliberately defies comprehension, with constant evolution. A demon might serve as a lowly messenger one moment and commander the next. Screamers, ray-like entities that hunt through warp currents, can fuse together to form flamers, projecting warp fire that burns reality itself. An Imperial scholar described facing Tzeentch's hordes as fighting an enemy whose battle plan is written in a language that changes every time you try to read it. Slaanesh's demonic hierarchy is perhaps the most insidious. His or her demonettes combine seductive beauty with lightning-fast lethality. Their psychic glamour causes victims to see exactly what they find most attractive until too late. During the Perdition campaign, an entire Imperial Guard regiment reportedly laid down their weapons, entranced by visions of their loved ones approaching across the battlefield, only to be slaughtered when the demonettes' true forms were revealed inches from their faces. Slaanesh organizes these troops into symphonies of pain, with each unit creating suffering that complements others like instruments in an orchestra. For all four Chaos Gods, advancement means literally becoming a larger embodiment of your god's will. Successful lesser demons transform into greater demons, entities that can command entire armies and challenge even the mightiest space marine heroes. The true terror of demonic forces lies in their adaptive nature. Unlike mortal armies, demonic forces reshape themselves between encounters, learning from failures and exploiting weaknesses with supernatural efficiency. Imagine facing an enemy who not only remembers your tactics, but evolves specifically to counter them. The strategies that saved you today becoming the very vulnerabilities that will destroy you tomorrow. Independent operators, warp entities that serve no god. Just when you thought you understood the rules of fighting demonic forces, the warp throws another curveball at reality. Entities that don't play by anyone's rules, not even the Chaos Gods'. Picture this. You're a veteran Inquisitor who spent decades learning to counter Nurgle's plagues, or Tzeentch's sorcery, only to encounter something completely outside that framework. Something ancient that was drifting through the Empyrean long before the first human ever felt fear or rage. The most disturbing truth about the warp is that the Big Four and the countless minions represent merely one ecosystem within this nightmare dimension. Scattered throughout the Immaterium are countless independent operators, entities that evolved, formed, and manifested without allegiance to any of the ruinous powers. These free agents are often more dangerous because they're unpredictable. When facing a bloodletter, you know it wants your skull. But what does an ancient, sentient shadow want? What drives a being that predates humanity itself? Consider a creature that defies explanation. The Kaleja. Parasitic beetles that would make Nurgle jealous of their efficiency. These warp spawn creatures infiltrate a host's bloodstream, absorbing and cataloging genetic information. The Kaleja transmit this data back to larger collectives in the warp. Imperial xenobiologists theorize they function as biological data gathering systems. But for whom? Victims gradually develop mutations as their DNA becomes compromised, manifesting traits from creatures the Kaleja previously sampled. Humans suddenly developing scales or tentacles from some interdimensional parasite remixing their genetic code. Imagine an Inquisitor Veronius of the Ordo Malleus encountering his first Kurel. His journals describe swirling vortices of color manifesting during a psychic storm, surrounding the dying. They absorb the final moments of consciousness, leaving behind hollow shells where souls once resided. Unlike demons, Kurel don't seek possession or corruption. They collect experiences. Survivors report feeling profound curiosity emanating from these entities rather than malice, suggesting they serve as psychic library preserving memories that would otherwise dissipate in the warp. The warp's mysteries deepen with entities like the Nephilim, ghostly humanoids with elongated limbs and faceless heads that drift through sections of the warp like deep-sea predators. Imperial scholars believe they're the collective consciousness of a psychically powerful species physically extinct for eons. Without bodies to return to, they became permanent warp dwellers, hunting other entities to consume their essence. The Nephilim can remember physical reality, temporarily manifesting in real space without hosts as translucent figures whose touch ages victims centuries and seconds. While Chaos Gods battle for supremacy, the Chronomancers manipulate time from the warp's outskirts. These clock-faced, robed figures surrounded by spinning gears don't seek worship. They're obsessed with maintaining what they consider the correct flow of time. Imperial fleet commanders report temporal anomalies during warp travel bearing Chronomancer signatures, days repeating, crew members aging decades overnight, or encounters with future versions of themselves. The terrifying aspect of these independent operators is their incomprehensibility. A greater demon's motivations are clear. It serves its god. But what drives a sentient terror in reality collecting specific human memories? What purpose does a living mathematical equation serve as it rewrites physics in localized space bubbles? Some entities don't qualify as beings as we understand them. The axiomatics are living concepts, mathematical rules that gain consciousness within the warp's illogical environment. They appear as geometric patterns folding in impossible ways, causing reality to stutter. Exposure can rewrite understanding of basic concepts. Victims have been found unable to comprehend numbers above 4 or believing colors have physical weight. What truly distinguishes these independent entities from demonic forces is their ability to exist partially in real space without hosts. While most demons require possession, summoning rituals, or warp rifts to manifest physically, many independent operators have evolved methods to extend themselves directly into the material universe, making them all the more dangerous and unpredictable to those who encounter them. The deep warp, what lies beneath. Those parasitic entities we've discussed so far are like the shallow-end swimmers of the warp's cosmic ocean. But what happens when you dive deeper, past where even daemons fear to tread? There are layers of immaterium so profoundly alien and horrifying that even the Chaos Gods, beings who literally embody cosmic horror, refuse to venture there. When entities of near infinite power are scared of something, maybe we should be too. The warp, as most understand it, the realm of daemons, chaos gods, and nightmares, is merely the upper crust, a twisted reflection of material space. Imperial scholars describe the deep warp as existing in layers, with each stratum becoming increasingly detached from comprehensible existence. The first time I glimpsed beyond the veil, my mind shattered like glass, wrote Magos biologist Harren Krecht in his final transmission. What I witnessed wasn't merely incomprehensible, it rendered comprehension itself obsolete. Go deeper and reality unravels. The Ardo Malleus preserves forbidden texts describing expeditions where Grey Knights, the most mentally fortified warriors in the Imperium, returned babbling nonsense after glimpsing these deeper regions. Inquisitor Zavok speaks of realms where thought becomes geography, and memory forms the foundation of what passes for matter. In these regions, a single stray thought can manifest as an entire continent, while a forgotten memory might collapse into a black hole, devouring everything around it. In these middle layers exist entities that make regular daemons appear mundane. The Nemesaur are colossal beings, composed of countless consciousness fragments, harvested from souls that strayed too far from the warp's upper regions. They're like schools of piranha fused into massive predators, with each individual fish maintaining its own hunger, but instead of flesh, they consume identity and memory. The chronovores inhabit similar depths, feeding on temporal energy itself. These creatures are theorized to cause the lost time experienced by vessels in the warp, devouring hours or days from a ship's journey while leaving the crew unaware of the loss. Deeper still dwell the true Neverborn. Unlike demons who sometimes use this name, these entities were never born in any sense we understand. They don't evolve, weren't created, and have no origin. They simply are, existing in regions so removed from causality that concepts like beginning and end hold no meaning. At the deepest known level lies the infamous Well of Eternity. This isn't a physical well. Nothing in the deep warp has physical form as we understand it. The well is a concept given substance, where all knowledge, possibility, and truth converge into something beyond comprehension. Tzeentch once cast his servant Kairos Fateweaver into the well to learn its secrets. What returned was a broken, two-headed horror, one head seeing every possible future, the other every possible past, but never able to comprehend the present moment. Most entities that approach the well simply cease to exist, not through destruction, but through cosmic irrelevance. They become so insignificant against the backdrop of infinite knowledge that reality forgets they ever existed. The Chaos Gods fear this place because it contains knowledge that undermines their existence. For beings whose identity is built on being supreme powers, this is existentially devastating. The Ordo Chronos theorizes that the well isn't actually part of the warp, but perhaps a boundary between the warp and an even more incomprehensible dimension. Some suggest the 5 minutes to midnight on the symbolic doomsday clock of the 40k universe refers to reality being consumed by whatever lies beyond the well. Souls without protection eventually dissolve in the warp's upper layers, their energy recycled into the endless chum of the immaterium. Those descending into the deep warp face worse fates. In middle layers, predators like the Nemesaur consume them. Deeper still, they transform into hollow ones, fragments of consciousness existing in perpetual becoming without achieving true being. As for souls reaching the deepest regions, before taking his own life, a space marine librarian who brushed against these depths during a catastrophic Geller field failure described seeing souls unraveling like thread, each strand rewoven into the fabric of everything, becoming both more and less than they were. Warp phenomena, storms, rifts, and mysteries. If you thought the deepest regions of the warp were terrifying, consider this. There are phenomena so catastrophic they can rip apart entire star systems without a single daemon lifting a claw. When the barrier between reality and unreality completely shatters, the results are reality breaking. Imperial records describe the fate of the Emperor's Wrath, a battlecruiser caught in a sudden warp tempest near Akkadian Gate. When recovered, the vessel's hull had been twisted inside out, with crewmen fused into the metal bulkheads, still alive, still screaming, centuries later. While we've been talking about the creatures that call the warp home, the immaterium itself carries devastating environmental hazards. Encountering a daemon resembles meeting a shark while swimming, but a warp storm is a hurricane that bends the laws of physics. You might fight a shark. You cannot fight a hurricane transforming what water actually is while you're drowning in it. The warp storms stand as the most infamous of these phenomena, massive disturbances in the immaterium that spill into real space. Regions of space become impossible to navigate, communications fail, and dimensional barriers weaken to dangerous levels. The Gothic War erupted from one of these particularly violent storms, trapping an entire imperial sector for almost a decade. Historical records describe vessels emerging centuries later with crews who experienced only weeks of subjective time, aged backwards, some transformed into children or embryos, retaining adult memories while slowly descending into madness. More catastrophic are warp rifts, places where the barrier between real space and the immaterium has torn completely open. The Theatrix Maledictum exemplifies this horror, a galaxy-spanning tear that emerged after Cadia's fall, physically dividing the Imperium. On one side lies Imperium Sanctus, where the Astronomicon still shines and Imperial forces maintain order. On the other side, Imperium Nihilus. Imperium Nihilus, the Dark Imperium, where the Emperor's light barely penetrates and entire systems vanish into the encroaching warp. Near these rifts, causality disintegrates. Inquisitorial reports document worlds where time flows differently by elevation. Mountain dwellers age years, while valley inhabitants experience minutes. Other planets endure blood rains, transforming into screaming faces upon impact. Or matter spontaneously transmuting as physics temporarily suspends. The boundaries pulse and shift, sometimes consuming entire systems overnight, only to regurgitate them centuries later, transformed beyond recognition. The Chronos strife of M38 occurred when a subsector reappeared after 2 millennia of warp submersion. But for inhabitants, only 3 days had passed, leaving them bewildered to find their empire reduced to a fragment of the larger Imperium. Smaller-scale phenomena exist as well. The Eldars speak of warp echoes, locations where traumatic events have left psychic imprints manifesting as recurring phantoms. Witnesses observed the same horrific battle repeating endlessly, ghost armies fighting and dying in perpetual loops. Some echoes interact with the living, dragging observers into the eternal nightmare replays. Void whales represent another mystery. Massive entities, larger than Imperial cruisers, swimming through both warp and real space, sometimes carrying entire ecosystems on their backs. These blur the line between creature and event. Navigator houses use them as landmarks during warp transit, following their migrations to avoid dangerous immaterium currents. The Terminus Decree stands as perhaps the most enigmatic warp-related phenomenon, a sealed box in Terra's inner sanctum, containing instructions only to be opened when all hope for humanity vanishes. Grey Knights guarding this box remain silent about its contents, though Inquisition rumors abound. Some believe it contains methods to revive the Emperor from his half-dead state. Others suspect instructions for shutting down the Golden Throne, allowing the Emperor to die and potentially be reborn as an unprecedented warp entity. Yet others whisper of a trigger for a weapon capable of annihilating both material universe and warp simultaneously, a final extinction option. These phenomena fundamentally differ from conventional warp entities. They possess no comprehensible desires or motivations. A warp storm cannot be bargained with. A rift cannot be tricked. They exist purely as expressions of the immaterium's chaotic nature, raw manifestations of reality bleeding into our dimension. Divine creations, gods made by mortals. Speaking of raw manifestations of unreality, did you know that several races in the Warhammer universe have accidentally created their own gods? That's right. While the Chaos Gods form naturally from the collective emotions of sentient beings, some of the most powerful entities in the warp were deliberately designed as weapons or inadvertently manifested through belief. The most dramatic example of this cosmic DIY project comes from the Eldar. During the ancient war in heaven, the mysterious Old Ones were losing their desperate conflict against the Satan and the Necron servants. In their desperation, they engineered the Eldar race to be inherently psychic and helped them create psychic constructs as weapons. These were fully formed conceptual beings designed to battle star-eating gods. As millions of Eldar across countless generations worshipped these entities, they transformed dramatically. Cain evolved from a weapon of war into a bloody-handed god of murder with distinct personality and desires. The pivotal moment came during the Eldar's Golden Age when Cain's temples filled with blood sacrifices, feeding his consciousness until he became self-aware. Isha, initially a fertility concept, developed into a complex goddess of healing and growth through millions of years of Eldar mothers calling upon her during childbirth. Segarak, the lightning god, evolved from a simple trickster weapon into a being of such cunning that he was the only Eldar god to fully escape Slaanesh's hunger. The Eldar pantheon grew to include dozens of deities. For millions of years, these gods guided the Eldar civilization to unprecedented heights. Then came the fall. As Slaanesh burst into existence, this newborn chaos god consumed nearly the entire Eldar pantheon in one catastrophic feast, the ultimate cosmic irony of a race devoured by its own creation. Only 3 Eldar gods survived this divine massacre. Cain was shattered into fragments that became the avatars used by craftworlds in battle. Segarak escaped into the webway where he still hides, protecting his Harlequin followers. And Isha was captured by Nurgle, who keeps her imprisoned in his garden, testing new diseases on her while she secretly whispers cures to mortals. Unlike the elegant but tragic Eldar approach, the Orcs created gods through brute force belief. The Orcs, with their bizarre psychic field known as the Wah, have manifested 2 powerful deities, Gork and Mork. These twin gods embody the Orcish ideals of being brutally cunning and cunningly brutal, though good luck on getting any 2 Orcs to agree on which is which. What makes Gork and Mork remarkable is their immunity to chaos corruption. While the Eldar gods were consumed and the human emperor struggles against chaos, the Orc gods remain uncompromised. Their straightforward nature matches the Orc psyche perfectly, making them among the most stable warp entities in existence. Recent reports indicate Gork and Mork use the Great Rift as cosmic highways, transporting entire Orc fleets through the tears in reality to emerge at promising battle sites. The Tau Empire presents a contrasting case of accidental deification. The Tau themselves barely register in the warp, having minimal psychic presence. Their greater good philosophy is secular and rational. However, when human worlds joined their empire, something unexpected happened. Human subjects, and their stronger warp connection, began interpreting the greater good as a religion rather than a philosophy. Billions of human minds contemplating a benevolent force guiding the Tau Empire created a manifestation of the greater good itself. A grotesque entity, composed of multiple Tau features, blended together into an impossible form. The ethereal cast watches in horror as a civilization that barely understands the warp find itself responsible for a newborn entity they cannot control or communicate with. What distinguishes these manufactured deities from natural warp entities is their focused, coherent personalities. Where Khorne embodies all rage across the galaxy, Cain represented specifically Eldar concepts of ritualistic warfare. The transformation of these constructs into true gods demonstrates the fundamental truth of the warp. Belief doesn't just influence reality. In sufficient quantities, it creates reality. The Emperor's Angels, Imperial Saints and Loyalist Daemons. That golden light that suddenly appears to save Imperial forces when all hope seems lost? It's the Emperor's own version of demonic manifestation. Here's the thing nobody wants to admit. The Imperium has its own daemons. They just call them saints and angels instead. The uncomfortable truth that any sufficiently educated inquisitor knows, but few would dare to speak aloud, is that the psychic might of the God Emperor works through the warp in ways suspiciously similar to the ruinous powers. The massive psychic beacon of the Astronomicon creates a focal point for faith-based manifestations that serve the Imperium's interest. Consider the practical difference between a bloodletter appearing in a flash of rage and Saint Celestine descending on wings of light. Both are warp entities made manifest through emotional energy. Imperial Saints represent perhaps the most direct parallel to demons. Take Alicia Dominica, the first leader of the Sisters of Battle. During the Age of Apostasy, she was brought before the Golden Throne itself, where something profoundly changed her. Whatever she witnessed transformed her from a loyal soldier into a vessel of the Emperor's will, capable of feats beyond normal human capability. When she confronted the tyrant Goj Vendir, witnesses reported her blade shimmering with golden energy before she separated his head from his shoulders. Other saints display equally disturbing parallels to demonic entities. Saint Lucia perceived corruption directly after losing her eyes, identifying heretics by the shadows that cling to their souls. Saint Mina survived direct hits from orc artillery, surrounded by a glimmering force field no weapon could penetrate. After her death, golden shields have spontaneously formed around Imperial forces over 200 times. These manifestations invariably grow stronger with worship and weaker where faith diminishes, exactly mirroring how demonic entities function. Saint Catherine's essence split into 6 living saints, known as the Gemini Superia. After her physical death, the manifestation mirrors the splitting mechanics of Tzeentch's pink horrors with unsettling precision. During the massacre at Hydra Fur, when Chaos cultists breached the central cathedral, 3 of these fragments manifested simultaneously across different sectors, each radiating golden light that burned away corruption while leaving the faithful untouched. The Legion of the Damned represents an even more disturbing parallel. These spectral space marines appear from nowhere during the Imperium's darkest hours, the black armor decorated with fire and bone imagery. They show no pain, communicate telepathically, and vanish once their mission is complete. During the siege of Obdurus, they appeared simultaneously on 18 different fronts, impossible for physical beings. They walk through solid objects, manifest and dematerialize at will, and remain unaffected by anti-psychic measures that typically banish demonic entities. The logical explanation? These aren't space marines anymore. They're the Emperor's demons, fueled by humanity's collective desperation. The Blood Angels chapter provides further evidence with the Sanguinar and the Black Angel. The Sanguinar appears as a golden armored figure whenever Blood Angels face extinction. During the Third War for Armageddon, 3 separate Blood Angels companies reported simultaneous sightings of the Sanguinar thousands of kilometers apart. The entity demonstrates strength beyond even Custodes' capabilities, moving faster than augmented eyes can track, while emanating an aura that empowers allies and terrorizes enemies. The Sisters of Battle prove particularly adept at manifesting these holy warp entities. Their acts of faith create tangible psychic effects indistinguishable from controlled warp manipulation. The living saints who rise from their ranks are essentially Imperial greater demons, created through martyrdom, absolute faith, and the Emperor's warp presence. What differentiates Imperial demons from Chaos demons? Well, Chaos demons form from raw emotion and excess. Imperial entities require both the Emperor's direct influence and exceptional human vessels. These individuals' souls become templates for warp entities that maintain aspects of their original personalities and devotion to humanity. Most revealing is what happens when Imperial forces encounter Chaos demons. Saint manifestations spike dramatically when Chaos forces appear, suggesting these entities serve as natural counterbalances. During the Battle of the Basilica of St. Leonis, a full demonic incursion was repelled by the spontaneous manifestation of St. Leonis herself, unseen for over 3,000 years. It makes sense when you consider the Emperor's nature. If the Chaos gods form from emotions like rage and despair, what might form from the collective worship, sacrifice, and faith of trillions, directed at a single being for 10 millennia? The answer? A pantheon of golden haloed warriors representing humanity's finest qualities, just as demons represent our basest instincts. Racial perspectives. How different species view the warp. The Emperor's pantheon provides one perspective on the warp, but did you know there are species in the galaxy who don't even see it as a realm of souls? The exact same dimension that humans experience as a nightmare hellscape of demons and madness appears completely different to Eldar, Orcs, and Tau. And those differences might just explain why some races thrive where others are consumed. The warp manifests uniquely to each major species, reflecting their psychic capacity and evolutionary history. Where humanity sees roiling madness, the Eldar perceive ancestral ruins. Orcs envision endless battlefields, and the Tau barely glimpse anything at all. For humanity, the warp represents a fundamental contradiction, simultaneously their lifeline and greatest threat. The Imperium relies on warp travel to connect its million worlds, yet that same dimension constantly tries to corrupt and destroy them. Imperial ships traverse the Imperium like medieval sailors navigating hurricane waters, their Gellar fields acting as spiritual barriers against the hostile entities outside. Humans' moderate psychic capacity makes their relationship with the warp particularly dangerous. They possess just enough sensitivity to be vulnerable without mastering it. This is why black ships patrol Imperial worlds, collecting psychers before they become gateways for demonic invasions, and why humanity serves as a primary battleground in the great game of chaos. Human souls provide perfect fuel for warp entities. The Eldar view the warp as archaeologists might regard a destroyed cultural heritage site. Where humans see only horror, they recognize the polluted remains of what was once their ancestral paradise. The warp was previously a realm of pure thought they navigated with masterful control, reshaping it almost as easily as clay. Now, Craftworld Eldar contain their souls in spirit stones to avoid Slaaneish's hunger after death. Their entire civilization knows the Path, structured channels that allow them to express potentially dangerous emotions safely. An Eldar on the path of the warrior can experience rage without feeding corn, while those on the path of the artist pursue beauty without empowering Slaanesh, a species-wide psychological defense mechanism. The Drukhari take the opposite approach. Unable to abandon their excessive tendencies, they've developed techniques to survive in the webway between real space and the warp. They drain others' souls to rejuvenate themselves, staying ahead of Slaanesh like fugitives constantly relocating to avoid capture. Orcs maintain perhaps the most fascinating relationship with the Immaterium. These fungal warriors possess a collective psychic field that alters reality based on their shared beliefs. Their wah energy infuses the warp with uniquely orcish qualities: green, aggressive, and oddly optimistic. While human psychers risk demonic possession, orc weird boys instead risk their heads exploding from excess energy. Their perception of the warp remains straightforward. Their deities, Gork and Mork, are simply the biggest, meanest orcs imaginable in a realm of endless fighting. Orcs resist chaos corruption because their species already collectively creates the reality they desire. Their unconscious manipulation turns beliefs like red ones go faster into actual physical laws, making their vehicles accelerate more quickly when painted red. The Tau represent the opposite extreme from the Eldar. Their souls create such tiny ripples in the Immaterium that they're practically invisible to demons, both their greatest protection and vulnerability. Chaos entities largely ignore them, but they've developed almost no defenses against warp threats because they barely understand they exist. Their relationship with the warp resembles someone severely colorblind trying to comprehend a rainbow through theoretical physics rather than direct perception. This blind spot left them completely unprepared for an unintended consequence. Their human subjects' belief in the greater good philosophy has manifested an actual entity in the warp. Imagine the ethereal cast's horror discovering their secular philosophy has become a godlike being without their knowledge. The Tau leadership faces a crisis. Their careful expansion and assimilation of other species has accidentally created a power they neither understand nor control. This newborn greater good entity could become either a protective force or something that corrupts their entire civilization. The tragic irony? The Tau themselves barely possess the psychic capacity to influence its development. So, what's the big takeaway from our galactic tour of the warp? This dimension serves as the ultimate cosmic mirror, reflecting everything we think, feel, and believe. The scary part? We're all contributing to it, whether we want to or not. The next time you're pushing your minis around the table or diving into a black library novel, remember that the line between demon and angel is razor thin. The Imperium Saints and the Chaos Gods as servants are both manifestation of mortal minds projected into the Immaterium. Does this make you wonder what your own thoughts might create there,